Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the SysAdmin DOJO podcast. On today's episode, we're continuing our talk from last week about Hyper-V management tools. So last week we kind of covered the traditional management tools, and this week we're going to be talking about the next generation of Hyper-V management tools. So we're going to be talking about Azure Arc, we're going to be talking about Windows Admin Center, where they fit, what they are, why we're excited about them, all coming up next on the SysAdmin DOJO podcast. All right, so, I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about kind of the classic tools, right? I mean, it makes sense. We've used them for such a long time, right? We have a lot of experience with them. Now, there are, I guess, what I would consider to be two new-ish tools. One of them is for sure new, but, Windows Admin Center it's been like a year and a half since that came out now, hasn't it? It's been out for a little while.
It's longer than that.
Is it really? I have a bad sense of time for,
Oh, yeah, I do too. I think it's past 2 years old now.
Maybe it's 2 years. It still feels like it's quite in its infancy. And I mean, I guess as far as like features go and maturity goes, it still is a fairly young product, right? I mean, heck, I think the last time I looked, the DNS plugin for Windows Admin Center is still in preview, it's still in preview. But the other tool that I wanted to mention really quick, and we'll talk about it a little bit after Windows Admin Center, is Azure Arc. And Azure Arc, I would say, is kind of the new kid on the block, but there's a huge asterisk next to Azure Arc when it comes to Hyper-V management, which we'll talk about here in a second. But when it comes to Windows Admin Center, Eric, you wrote a first edition of our Windows Admin Center ebook here at Altero. For those of you that have not read it, it's a great read. We'll be having an updated version coming out here at some point in the next, 4, 5, 6, 7 months. I know that's quite a range there. But the thing is Windows Admin Center, it moves quite quickly from a development perspective. For those that may not necessarily know, can you give us a quick rundown of what Windows Admin Center really is, Eric?
It is Microsoft's attempt to just get away from MMC.
Right.
So MMC came out in like a service pack for Windows NT. That's how old it is. And it hasn't really changed very much since then. It's on version 3, and I can't tell you when version 3 released because it has been a really long time. So yep. The whole framework and everything is old, and it's built around the higher trust model that we had back then, which kind of like, well, your network is flat and all the computers on your network can see all the other computers on your network, because the only way to really get broken into is for someone to physically walk in your building and jack into your connection, right? That was the theory that was the truth when these tools were invented. And, since then, now we've got Wi-Fi and networking everywhere and a drop every 3 or 4 feet. And even in mid-sized companies, there's way too many network ports to monitor all at once correctly. So we've had to come up with different threat models and different solutions, and now you have firewalls and routes and VLANs and all kinds of things. And so if you look at an MMC console, a Failover Cluster Manager, Hyper-V Manager, both of them, you're going to be opening a few ports. VMM, you're going to be opening a bunch of ports, right?
Yep. With
Windows Admin Center, you open just the WS man port on either 5985 or 5986. And that's it. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. They should all run across that. And if they don't, and you're using an extension that's not from Microsoft, and this is question of support, right? So we're moving into, and also in the modern era, everything is basically a web app.
Yep.
I will not sit here and tell you that desktop development has ended, because that's a complete lie. There's still, I don't know what the division is anymore, but what I do know for a fact is that web development has extremely grown since MMC3, and it's ballooned. I don't even know ballooned is a big enough word for it, So now we're doing everything in web apps. So Windows Admin Center brings all of that. It gives you the smaller, it kind of scopes down what you need to do to make it work. And it's a HTML5 web page that works in whatever browser you like. Well, maybe not. I should be careful how far I cast that out there. It's supported in Edge and Chrome. So
It does kind of sort of work in Safari. I can neither confirm nor deny how I know that.
Yeah, but give Safari a week and it'll stop. So
Yeah, that's very true. When I need to use it legit, I fire up Edge because it's fully supported and it works.
right.
So it's
that's where you're.
Yeah, so it's basically MMC webified, and I would say, I look at the Windows Admin Center interface, and sometimes I feel like I'm working in Azure, right? If you've ever used the Azure portal, I mean, it looks different, but it feels the same. You have kind of this concept of blades, and everything is kind of listed and positioned in a very similar manner. I think the thing that really reminds me of Microsoft Azure is the notifications up in the top right. So in Azure, you provision a VM or make a change or whatever, you get that little pop-down notification from the top right, says, hey, completed, or there was an error or whatever. You get the same thing in Windows Admin Center, which I think I've had that work with varying degrees of success when using Windows Admin Center. Windows Admin Center, like most things in IT, gets really, really picky when there are DNS issues, right? Oh, hey, I can't resolve this host name, and there's fire and brimstone, and everything's terrible, and I'm going to throw all this red text, right? I noticed that especially when I set up I recently deployed Windows Server 2022 Storage Spaces Direct in my home lab. And when I sat down, I'm like, okay, I'm going to use Windows Admin Center for as much of this as I possibly can. You know how hard it is to keep Windows Admin Center happy when you're setting up the DNS servers for the environment that you're working in?
I bet that's pretty miserable.
It gets very upset. What I ended up having to do was set up and run a domain controller virtual machine on my laptop and provision the secondary DC inside of the lab environment. And when I was all done, move them both, move the one that was on my laptop, move it into the cluster, and that's ultimately how I got around the issue. But
I remember recommending that as a solution to more than one problem. I think that should be a tool that people have now.
Right? Exactly. So,
a virtual machine sitting here on my laptop just waiting, and then I snapshot it and set up your domain and then roll it back and it'll be ready for the next guy.
Yep. That's right. That's right. So, it does work pretty well. And in terms of Windows Admin Center, I would say in established environments, it works very well.
Yes.
I've not had any issues with it in standard environments. I will say where it has really shined for me is GUI-ifying, I guess I would say, some of the storage spaces direct controls. And if you're familiar with Storage Spaces Direct in any way, shape, or form, you know that historically we've only been able to manage S2D using PowerShell commandlets, right? Right. Now they have some of that stuff baked directly into Windows Admin Center. There's a couple of other Hyper-V specific controls that are baked into Windows Admin Center as well. Like, if you create a virtual machine in Hyper-V Manager and you want to do nested virtualization inside that virtual machine, you have to get PowerShell out and, the set VM processor commandlet with the exposed virtualization extensions. You have to do that setting. Well, when you create the VM in Windows Admin Center now, you have a checkbox to enable it right from there, which is really nice. The other thing that I've found with Windows Admin Center versus Hyper-V Manager, when you remove a virtual machine in Hyper-V Manager, it's like, hey, do you want to delete the virtual disks? It gives you the option. Where in Hyper-V Manager, they're just left behind.
They're just left behind.
Right.
The peripherals, I do get this argument every once in a while. It's like, they're peripherals. Hard drives have been peripherals since the day they were introduced. They're still peripherals. Deleting a virtual machine, in my mind, should not delete the hard drives. I think that Microsoft does it correctly. And not everyone agrees.
Unless you're the VMM team.
Yeah. And then they're just going to...
They just nuke them. Have you ever noticed that?
Bye. Oh, yeah.
They just,
Oh,
yeah, you delete a
you think
VM
that's
in
bad? Try
VMM.
deleting a service someday. If you ever done that, like, oh, I think I messed this up. I didn't get the right number of virtual machines, so you delete the service, so it wipes all the virtual machines, all the hard disks, everything, one click. You're done. Oops.
Wait, what?
Oh, you didn't know that? Yeah, that's another one of its wonderful tricks is you can like one click delete. Like, let's say you go out and you deploy Exchange as a service, so it's
Right?
got all the different, like, all your different servers you need to make an
Yep.
Exchange thing work. You deploy them as a service. And you say, you know what? I don't want that anymore. You go out, right click, delete that service. All those virtual machines are just gone, just like that, gone. Disk, configuration, all of
Oh,
it,
I've never
just like that.
noticed that before. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Oh, and it's
that's so
like on the one
scary.
hand, it's like, and it doesn't really make it clear. I think that's what upsets you the most is like,
Right.
I think I'm removing this service layer that has incorporated all these different virtual machines. That's what I think I'm doing, but I'm not. I'm tearing down the whole stack.
You're nuking it all.
Oops,
It's all gone.
you're nuking it all, and in one click, it's just gone. Like, oh, yeah,
Oh,
I should
man.
have put a couple more red flags around that one. Fortunately, I
Right?
didn't trigger it in production. That's a good thing, but I would
Right.
be willing to bet someone out there's got a horror story
Somebody
where that's how they
has.
do it.
Yep, that's
Somebody
right.
does.
That's right.
That's
Um,
that's that's a good thing.
right.
Or a really mad admin on his way out. Watch this. Click,
Oh,
click,
oh,
click,
good
click, click,
God.
and all of a sudden you have nothing. You're down to 6 hosts and nothing
Oh,
else
man.
left to go.
You
Oh,
know, that's probably a different podcast episode, but I mean, in this day and age, for somebody to do that, they'd have to be out of their mind, you know?
I'll follow you for your life. You'll never get over
Yeah,
that.
I
Don't do
can
that.
only imagine the litigation and oh yeah, that's a whole other episode of the Dojo
Yeah.
podcast. We'll have to get into at some point. But anyway, so I've talked about WAC a little bit. I want to talk about the other new kid on the block here, and that is Azure Arc. Now, Azure Arc it's tied really closely with the Azure portal. Now, what's funny about this, and which took me a little while to kind of figure out really what the differences were, was WAC itself is very tightly integrated with Microsoft Azure. There's a lot of hooks into Microsoft Azure, a lot of services that it brings in. You can register Windows Admin Center with your Microsoft Azure subscription and enable a lot of hybrid cloud features. Now, Azure Arc takes that kind of to the next level in that Azure Arc allows you to basically fully manage your on-premises virtualization solution from Microsoft Azure itself. Now, that said, you're not going to get the level of granularity that you get with Hyper-V Manager or PowerShell or Windows Admin Center. What I found is that it's really useful for those situations where you already have all your ducks in a row on premises. You've got your cluster set up. You've got plenty of capacity, and it just becomes another location inside of your Microsoft Azure subscription, right? So when you deploy a new workload, you'll have those options of, hey, I want to deploy this to East US, West US, and my data center using Azure Arc, right? You have that option. So the question that comes up, okay, well, Azure Arc looks really cool. Should I be using that for my own Hyper-V management? And my answer is always like, well, yeah. Are you utilizing Azure services today? Are you doing everything you should be doing on premises? Do you have a full-blown, S2D, Azure Stack HCI deployments or whatever? If the answer to those questions are yes, maybe Azure Arc is something you want to look at. I know the other thing that Azure Arc can do is push down managed SQL instances onto on-premises hardware as well, just like it pushes them onto Microsoft Azure, which is really cool, So really, I see Azure Arc as kind of abstracting, all the micro choices for you, right? And just making your data center just another place to run workloads, So I guess if I looked at all of these management tools, and again, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, Microsoft's biggest strength is choice, right? I think moving forward, I will probably spend most of my time in Windows Admin Center for run-of-the-mill day-to-day administration. But if I'm doing anything that requires any level of automation or repetitiveness, obviously it's PowerShell. And I think moving forward, personally, I'll probably only get Hyper-V Manager out if I'm using it locally on my laptop, or Hyper-V Manager or Failover Cluster Manager if and when I get in trouble for some reason. Those are, I think those will always be my fallback, oh crap tools. And when those fail, it's time for more PowerShell, right?
Right.
So, I don't know. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Well, PowerShell is my first choice almost all the time, because at my stage, I can probably do it in PowerShell faster than I can do it in any of the graphical tools. The one exception being like a tricky live migration where I want to move, say, some of the storage, but not all of it. And that's I can do it, but I gotta. It's unpleasant enough that I'll usually do it, unless I have like 80 to do, and then I won't. So
right.
PowerShell is probably going to be my first choice for the foreseeable future. Then after that, I actually do spend more time than I would have thought in Hyper-V Manager and then Failover Cluster Manager in that order. Yeah. A couple of reasons are I'm starting to move away from using a cluster of Hyper-V hosts and down into, let's see where if we can move the high availability to a different level, to a different tier. Like if you're running web servers, I don't think I would put a web server in Hyper-V cluster anymore. I would just make a web cluster farm and let the load balancer do its job, because there are things built specifically for that. I feel a lot of times like Failover Cluster Manager is abstracting too much. And a lot of people forget that, I can have virtual machines running on, every node all at once. So they look at it like, this is an active-active configuration, but it's not.
Right.
Your virtual machine runs in one location at any given time, therefore it's active-passive. So in that case, if I can set up an active-active configuration using application tools, I would prefer that over a cluster. And if I'm going to do that, then what does the virtual machine cluster give me?
Right.
You know what I mean? You can over-engineer things, as you well know.
Right.
So I do spend more time in Hyper-V Manager because I'm moving away from clustering where it makes sense. And then Failover Cluster, because I have, maybe you got a big VDI deployment or something, and that's pretty good for that, So I'm getting more warm toward Windows Admin Center. It's really good. Remember that the people you were talking about a little bit ago that have 2 nodes?
Yes.
And that Windows Admin Center would be really ideal for that. Today with Windows Admin Center, it's just one box, and it takes a long time to move between boxes.
That is my biggest gripe with it.
Yes, that takes a long time. And the other part that kills me is that I'm going to agree with you on the Azure style of layout. They have that kind of Azure mentality, but it's not the same, because if I want to look at 2 hosts, then I need to make 2 windows and put them on the same screen, and now I can't see anything. Now I got to scroll for 3 or 4 hours. It's like they just can't conceive that you might want to do that. And yes, I do have multiple monitor layouts, but I'm rarely just using Windows Admin Center. I usually have all kinds of things going on. I can't just give away an entire screen to Windows Admin Center. That's just not going to work for me.
Right.
So, but it's designed around running full screen on like an 8K monitor and on a wall. That's what they're thinking of when they design it. I fully believe that, even though they may argue that. Yeah, I've seen it running on a really big screen, and it's amazing, but I don't have one in my desk. So, they're not going to be putting a service hub up for me, just for my own personal. This is not going to happen.
Right.
So because of that, because Hyper-V Manager manages multiple hosts better than Windows Admin Center does by a long way.
Yes, very much so.
So it's interesting because a lot of times I feel like Microsoft is really seeing the forest in a way that other people don't. That I think a lot of times when they go to solve a new problem, they do actually walk back to first principles. So where you've got other people who are like, I've got this solution and I've been selling it for 10 years and it makes a lot of money, so I'm just going to figure out how to make everything fit into this. Whatever your problem is, I'll find a way to shoehorn it here. Microsoft to go, you know what, our old tools don't work right, let's make new ones. Or our old systems don't work, let's make new ones. Let's solve the problem from the direction of the people have it. I think they're really good about that. And I think some of that is where Windows Admin Center came from. But at the same time, they also kind of get wrapped up in this world of, well, okay, we did that. We went to first principles and we've been working on first principles. And now we have principles. We're not going to go back to first principles yet. So if they're not careful, then Windows Admin Center is going to silo itself to where, yeah, if you have 1 or 2 boxes, it's amazing. But when you have 50 or 60,
and then it's going to turn it, and then it's going to turn itself. It'll turn itself into server manager at that point, right?
It will. It will. And it'll be interesting to see, because at this point I'm nowhere near ready to call Windows Admin Center a dead end. It's just they are too invested in it and they're working too hard on it to happen. It's just I think they need to find a better way to figure out how people actually use their products in the real world and listen more to the frustration. Like when they killed user voice, it's like I get kind of the reason behind it, but the feedback hub is just why does it exist? Is it
Right.
It's a black hole you're just casting things into, and maybe they do stuff on it, maybe they don't, but do you ever really know? Whereas user voice, you could see them going, yeah, we did that.
Yeah, that's true. I really like that about user voice. Hopefully they'll bring it back for Windows Admin Center at some point. But
I think their whole thing was we want to use Microsoft-based metrics and not go third party. Okay. I'm not going to argue with the merits of the move, but I will argue with you weren't ready to make the jump at the time that you made it. I don't think that's what it's up. So I don't know. So Windows Admin Center, not for me, not yet.
Not yet.
VMM, I still use either where it makes sense, or there are a lot of vendors out there who, when they put their product in Hyper-V, that their APIs will call VMM's APIs because they do a better job of multi-host management than any of Microsoft's other APIs. So like the native WMI is the same from host to host to host, but you're like, oh, I want to go manage a whole bunch of nodes all at the same time. It's an iterative thing with WMI, whereas with VMM, you can say every box in this cluster send one command, right? And you don't do the iteration, the VMM API does it. So it's easier from a developer standpoint to interact with VMM than it is with the traditional WMI. So there are cases where VMM makes sense and nothing else really does. And in those, oh yeah, I'll use VMM every day. And if it's got a bug, then I'll complain about it, but I'll do it anyway. So
begrudgingly do it.
Begrudgingly.
Okay,
fine. I wish they would throw the same resources at System Center that they do at Azure, because I think it could really need it. I feel like they kind of neglect System Center a lot and don't give them, because I feel like the product manager for that is kind of motivated to really make a good product. I just don't think the resources are there to make it happen. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
That's my opinion. I don't have any inside knowledge. I hope nobody's quoting me. I don't actually know that. That's just how I feel.
I see what you mean though, because I mean, like, I feel like if you ironed out and smooth the rough edges on VMM, it could be really, really good, right? But there's just some quirks about it that just for me are just a deal breaker, you know?
Hey, let's go all, pop culture here, like the Star Wars prequels with a few minor tweaks would have been some of the best movies ever filmed. But as is, no. But they're like, all you had to do was
change this one little thing, right?
But you didn't, and now it's really not so great. That's kind of how I feel about VMM. It was like you're right there. You just got to push it over the finish line.
Right. For the record, I like the prequels more than I like the newest trilogy. I'm just gonna put that out there.
Well, yeah, you and me are on the same page, because I literally, how for a while there, every time somebody tells something, I would say, oh, you just honey badgered that. I've stopped doing that. Now I say, you J.J. Abrams that, because in my opinion, he is one of the best directors of our time, but he is one of the worst screenwriters of all time. And I will own that. I will defend it, because
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yeah, totally agree with that. So, all right, well, I think we're about at the hour mark, Eric. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, we intended to go for at least half an hour, give or take 90 minutes. So we're still within our mandates. So, we hit it. So, but Anyway, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Eric, my friend, thanks for coming and sharing your insight as always. It's always fun having these conversations with you and, kind of getting your insight. I'm sure the listeners appreciate it too. So thank you for stopping by. For those of you that are, what's that?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. I'm sure we'll have you on future episodes as well. So I'm sure we'll be seeing you again. For those of you listening, be sure to check out the Altero dojos. So we've got a lot of great content out in the Altero dojos. So we originally started as just a Hyper-V blog, but it's grown from there. We've got a Hyper-V blog, we've got a VMware blog. We've got a MSP blog if you're an MSP. We now have a backup and DR section. We will soon have a Windows specific section for Windows Server and Windows clients. Not to mention a Microsoft 365 section and an Azure section as well. So I think about the only thing I don't have in there is it's probably easier to say what we're not covering these days than what we are covering inside of the Microsoft stack. So you can find information about that at www.altero.com/dojo. I'll make sure that makes it into the show notes below this video, or maybe above it or to the side, depending on the platform you're on. Look around our smiling faces, and I'm sure you'll find those resources. Additionally, I'm going to put make sure we get all the relevant social media handles in here for Altero, for Eric and I. So if you want to connect with us after the show, you can do that, and maybe ask any follow-up questions you may have. Or if you want to interact with us directly as well, we also have the Dojo forums, dojoforums.altero.com. Eric and I are pretty active there. Eric more so than me, but I do hop on there on occasion and chime in myself. And with that, I will let everybody get back to their day. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you for a future episode of the Dojo Podcast. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, it's Andy again. Hey, thanks for watching the episode today. Hope you enjoyed it. One thing I wanted to leave you with, we've been talking a lot about Azure Stack HCI, Hyper-V, hybrid cloud, and a lot of the recent episodes. Wanted to let you know that on March 23rd, we are running a webinar that talks about all things Azure Stack HCI and hybrid cloud. Now, you can register for that webinar by clicking on the link in the description of this episode. And if you're watching or listening to this episode after March 23rd, you can use that same link to watch the webinar on demand. So hope you enjoy it. Again, we hope to see you for a future episode of the podcast. Have a great day.